What's up, guys? I am psyched to start actually building now. Our 1979 BMW R65 behind me. We spent the last video, go back and watch it if you didn't see it, stripping it down, ordering all of our parts. Now comes the hard part, but also the fun part, building it, making it into whatever we want. Now, I'm going to start the way I like to start, with the angle grinder. Let's get to work.
Sometimes to build something new, it's easier to first raise to the ground what's already there. In this case, we're adding a longer swing arm from a newer BMW, converting to a monoshock, fabricating a new subframe and seat mount, using an R100 fuel tank, relocating the battery under the engine, and lowering the front end. Yeah, it's going to be a lot easier to have a clean slate for all that. That's why I decided to start the process by eliminating all of the mounts, brackets, tabs, and supports that either won't be used in the build, or at least I don't think they'll be used, only to find out later that I wish I didn't prematurely cut it all off just because I got a case of the happy grinder. A single cutoff wheel on an angle grinder goes a long way here. I'm not making any of the spots perfectly smooth either, because once I tear the whole bike down again for painting and powder coating, I'll go over all these spots again with a grinder and flap disc to smooth out the metal perfectly so it looks smooth under paint. Now, with the frame being a clean slate, so to speak, we can start the first chore of swapping our swing arm. For the new swing arm, I decided to go with a BMW R80 donor bike. This is a bigger and longer wheelbase version of the old AIRHEAD, which is going to stretch out the back end a few inches. Because of that, although you can bolt right up your rear drive and wheel and put the swing arm in the frame without modification, you still need to make sure that you buy a swing arm with the drive shaft in it, because it's longer than the one we have. Stretching this bike out and then later converting to a monoshock like you're going to see is going to look insane. Just wait. The next item on the punch list was to replace the upper triple tree with a black billet one from Cognito Moto with integrated LED indicator lights. That's right, I'm not running any gauges on this build. The issue is that this head bolt was the tightest bolt on planet Earth. I seriously felt like NASA trying to open the OSIRIS-REx asteroid sample. Seriously, I've never met a stuck fastener like this one on any motorcycle before. This is the third gen Milwaukee high torque impact that can hammer bolts loose with over 1,000 foot-pounds. This has sheared rusty bolts before. That's honestly the easiest way to take rusty bolts off with this gun, is just to shear them off. And it ended up breaking the first 10mm Allen socket that I hammered it with. Now, although I don't like to torch cast aluminum, because we're not reusing this triple clamp, I didn't mind getting it smoking hot and burning out the head bearings in the process. Finally, it gave way. But it's times like this that I think back to when I was young and poor and didn't have nice tools like this. What would I have done in this situation? Just a breaker bar with a 6-foot pipe and me hanging off the end like an orangutan? Ah well, the new triple clamp looks awesome. For hand controls, I went with high-quality American-made parts like Woodcraft clip-ons, ASV levers, and Motion Pro throttle. For the brake and clutch controls, however, I have a hard time finding aftermarket parts that are better than Japanese OEM. For that reason, on builds like this, I usually update it with factory parts. Here, I'm using Honda CBR 1000 RR sport bike clutch and brake mounts. Don't bother looking for a keyed ignition. I'm going to convert the kill switch into an ignition switch with only one position, everything on or everything off. When you build motorcycles, do you ever get the feeling that all you do is fabricate brackets? This seriously feels like a solid 80% of building any vehicle, fabbing up brackets and mounts. Now, it's not the flashiest work, but it's work that needs done. To mount the R100 fuel tank, I need to fab a pedestal mount for the rear of the tank onto the frame. The height of this mount is crucial because the angle of the tank needs to match up with the eventual angle of the seat, giving it those straight lines that make cafe racers so attractive. A few hours of labor later, we've got our tank mounted and are ready to start building our subframe and seat mount. Remember earlier when I was talking about what I used to do without these nice tools when I was younger? Well, we can't have everything in life, so when it came time to build the subframe out of 1-inch DOM tubing, because I don't have a nice tubing notcher, I decided just to notch the tubes by hand. After all, it's just a couple of joints, right? What a nightmare. You can find 100 YouTube videos of people telling you how it's easier to notch tube with an angle grinder. It's quicker than setting up a tube notcher. Yeah, that may be true for people that do it all day long. But if you're only notching tube once or twice a year, like me, buy the friggin' notcher so you don't have to learn from my mistakes, wasting hours of time hand notching these tubes. I eventually got so sick of it that I just ordered a notcher, waited a week or two for it to come in, and then did in 10 minutes what took me an hour or two to do earlier. The fact that the finished product looks so simple is a testament to the craftsmanship here. It's not simple. The stock frame tubes don't just bend downward, but they also taper outward at the same time. Mix that with the fact that the subframe rails had to be just perfect to match the angled lines of the fuel tank and bow outward so that the seat can mount on it. You're getting a heck of a lot of work here condensed down into just a few seconds of video, but that's how YouTube works. And now comes the big kahuna, time to add the Monoshock. This axle is thick enough that it doesn't twist under load and doesn't need reinforced like most twin shock axles would need to be if you were converting to just a monoshock on one side of it. But we do have to figure out how to mount the giant single shock onto the curved and bent stock frame rail. To do all this figuring, I went back to one of the greatest fabrication tools known to man: cardboard. Slowly, one piece at a time, I got a rough idea of how I wanted this mount to work and the rough shapes and sizes of the 4 pieces of metal that would make it up. Because the frame bows inward, but the shock can't, if I were to have made a simple 2-sided bracket that the shock slid into, one of the sides would have had very little welded surface area on that outside of the frame rail. To solve this issue, I decided to box in the shock bracket and add a curved piece running along the curved frame rail. This increases the amount of welded surface area that's holding this shock mount on and makes it bomb-proof. Definitely overkill, but that's better than underkill. Now that the Monoshock is mounted, it's time to permanently mount the seat. I started by making a simple seat pan bridging the subframe rails with metal. At this point, however, I realized that the seat needed to be raised about 3/4 of an inch in order to line up with the lines of the tank perfectly. So, do I just build basic metal brackets to lift it up? Or do I add something on top of the metal pan like plastic or rubber pucks to lift up the seat assembly and at the same time act as a bit of a vibration absorber? Almost like body mounts on a vehicle. Knowing that I wanted that, right, the type of rubber or plastic under the seat, I went the obvious route, ordering an industrial 3/4 inch cutting board from a restaurant supply store and cutting it to make a motorcycle seat pan. Doesn't everybody do that? But seriously, it's already black, it's much less expensive than buying polyurethane blocks or blanks, and it will be indestructible. I really like these stock snowflake wheels. I like them so much that I decided to keep the stock front end on this build, instead of switching to a modern sport bike front end as you'd expect. Now this also saves a few $100 in overall build costs. To use the front end though, I had to lower it. On most old forks, you add a spacer in the fork and cut the spring. This fork style works a bit differently however, and all I had to do was cut the spring itself to lower it. These forks will be completely rebuilt down the road, so I'm not bothering replacing any seals or anything now. The goal is just to get them set up. Now as you may notice, the big issue with doing this is the decreased fork travel. We're ending up with much less front fork travel, resulting in just a few inches of travel before the bottom fork tube impacts the lower triple tree. Though true, building motorcycles isn't just about usability. If it were, people would simply restore them and install heated grips and never modify anything else. So before you bash me for reducing the usability of this old bike, remember that it's not your money, it's not your motorcycle, and it doesn't have to be your style. A lowrider riding through East LA isn't the most usable or practical vehicle, but it sure looks cool, and so will this Beamer.
Now that this Beamer is sitting just how we want it, we've finished most of our primary fabrication and customizations on it. There is still a ton of work to do, but now's a good time to sort of pause and change gears. And what's the new gear going to be? One word: electrical. That's right, got a ton of electrical. Pretty much the entire wiring harness has to be changed, so we'll save that for the next video. Thank you guys so much for the patience that you're showing as we work in bigger chunks to make a lot of progress on our 1979 BMW R65. Thanks.